Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you, depending on when and where you are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are on episode 9 of our social emotional learning series, and we have a very special guest today. We have been eagerly waiting for our special guest, Dr. Bonnie Gasior. And here she is, and we're going to let her introduce herself, and then we're going to come back in. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, folks. Well, you already know my name, so I won't repeat it. I think Ricardo has pulled up a little bio that he pulled from LinkedIn, so feel free to just kind of browse through that. I can tell you that I am a faculty member at Cal State Long Beach. I teach Spanish. And as you'll see there on the screen too, I am also a mental health first aid instructor. And you might be wondering, well, what's the connection there? Right? Because they seem like two disparate things. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about how I came to be a mental health first aid instructor. On my campus, almost immediately when I arrived to campus about 20 years ago, I became involved in academic advising within the department. And after about 10 years of doing that, I would often joke with colleagues that I felt like I needed an honorary doctorate in counseling. Not that I was counseling students per se. I don't want to give that impression, but there was a lot of hand-holding, hug-giving, Kleenex passing going on. So I would always say, for every student who came to see me with an academic advising question, I would have a student who would come and just tell me about their family issues, their boyfriend issues, their financial issues. It was, and luckily I was a good listener, but there was always a part of me that felt like I wasn't trained to have those conversations, right? When you go to graduate school, you're prepared to teach, right? To teach a subject material. And so I stumbled upon mental health first aid after I had kind of stepped out of my advising role, but I've always been mentoring students, and I found that these conversations were still happening. So when I was in a leadership fellows program here on campus, that became my campus project. So in the year 2 of that program, you have to develop a campus impacting project. And that's when the light bulb went off, like, oh my gosh, I need to do something with mental health. Even though I'm not a mental health professional, right? We all have ways in which we can help. So I got certified in mental health first aid. I became an instructor. And now I'm working with the chancellor's office. We've been doing this for about 2 years, training faculty in mental health first aid, which is an 8-hour paraprofessional course. It's a certification course that basically teaches you how to recognize signs and symptoms of a mental health challenge. It teaches you how to use destigmatizing language, and it teaches you how to connect people with the professionals, right? The appropriate professionals. And what I've really loved about this work that I'm doing that I never expected would happen is that it's kind of infused my other areas of my life and my research. For example, wow. I published a textbook a few years ago, that's really student focused. I have a volume that came out last year on teaching literature through the lens of pop culture, right? Kind of meeting students where they're at. And right now I'm currently on sabbatical working on a book with 2 colleagues on internships from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, not so much for students, not so much, hey, here's how you get an internship, but looking at the problems that we're seeing in internships and how to make sure that internships are more equitable, especially for students of color. So, yes. And all of that, and hopefully in that book too, we're going to have a little part where we're going to talk about mental health first aid. So it is infused my life, as I said, in such enriching and complementary ways. And I know I haven't said this, but I want to thank both of you, particularly Ricardo, because he reached out to me for inviting me to be here to kind of have a platform to talk a little bit about student mental health, because it's something that's very near and dear to my heart, as it sounds like it is to yours too. So that's my intro.
Well, you obviously have done such amazing work and has made such an impact on so many students and whoever you're working with. So we are so honored that you're here today. But before we get to this, can I go over the title, because it's my fault. I got too excited and I forgot to talk about what we're actually
Yes,
doing.
and
So
I have to say this. I met Bonnie at an AP reading. Oh my God, many years ago, and then
Many
I
years ago.
teach in high school. I've had so many of my students go to her college, and to
Mhm.
see my students go back and say, "Oh, I have Dr. Bonnie as my teacher," and then that
Oh,
relationship she creates with them. James Ahumada, if you remember
Oh,
James Ahumada,
I
because we're friends
do.
with them on Facebook, and just knowing that you can create this relationship with them, and you're able
Right.
to just amazing, just amazing. And we
that's
were thinking
amazing.
about this, and we're like, I know someone that can help us with this, and I was just so
He
excited
was
to have
so
you here.
excited.
Oh, I
And now
was
I'm just
too.
as excited.
Yeah.
So today, as obvious as how we've been talking already, but we're going to be going over mental health and well-being of our students. That's our focus today with Dr. Gasior. So just so I wanted to make sure. And those of you who are new, who have never met us before, I'm Teresa Castro.
And I'm Ricardo Recinos.
So we kind of flipped things out of order. I got so excited. And we are both technology teachers, technology TOSAs from Hacienda La Puente Unified School District. So we're going to go ahead and go over our objective just so that we're all on the same page. So our objective today is to discuss the intersection between mental health and social emotional learning. Examine the role schools play in promoting mental health for all students. We're making that connection today. And our purpose is to go through tools to intervene, de escalate, and connect students with professional help. Because again, we're not claiming to be professional help in any way, but we need to help them find the help that they need, right? And how to be intentional in our focus on the promotion of mental health, which is especially important right now, coming back from the pandemic, all the different students that we work with. And our non-purpose, as usual, we do not expect you to throw out everything you've been doing. And please do not feel limited to what is shared today. So let's continue.
Teresa, I just wanted to say I
Yes,
really
sure.
appreciate you clarifying that we're not professionals, right? And that, including myself, right? That what I'm trying to really impose upon people today is that we can be bridges, we can be
Yes,
conduits,
yes,
right? Because it shouldn't have to just be, that there's this gap between the student and the professional. There need to be people in between, because sometimes students are going to come and
absolutely.
confide in their teachers,
Yes.
and
Mhm.
that's where we can be, really powerful. Mental health first aid is an early intervention program. And so I think it just really empowers people, again, not to diagnose. You don't
Right.
become, when you take the training, you're not a certified counselor, but you're empowered enough with the language, with the action plan that we use to be able to step in and help a student. Because I think that a lot of times we're just so fearful to step in, right? If it's a physical, we were talking before that if you walked into your classroom and a student was laying on the floor writhing in pain, you wouldn't say, well, I can't help, I'm not a doctor. Nobody would do that. You would do something. You would, right? Your instincts kick in. So why is it when a student has a mental health challenge, and I've heard my colleagues say this, I've heard people say, well, I'm not a counselor. Well, the thing is
Right.
mental health first aid isn't asking you to be that. Mental health first aid is asking you to be an ally, right? To be that bridge, to be that conduit, to have the conversation with the student, and to have it in a way where you can give them information and provide them resources and destigmatize mental health challenges so that they actually go to see those professionals and not be fearful when they do it.
Right.
So,
And thank you for saying that. 'Cause that perfect word, the
absolutely.
bridging, because I think that some teachers might be watching and be like, how does this actually affect me in the classroom? And really being that bridge. And I think that gives us the courage and the knowledge that we need. So definitely
Absolutely.
thank you for saying that.
Of
So
course.
here's our definition that we've been revisiting every week just to make sure we're all on the same page here. SEL is a process for helping children and adults, us too, right? Develop the fundamental skills for life effectiveness. SEL teaches the skills we all need to handle ourselves, our relationships, and our work effectively and ethically. And we're going to add to this today, just kind of bridge into what we're going over today. SEL is how well a student is able to practice and demonstrate the skills that are needed to regulate their emotions and to know how to interact with people, right? Which is such an important skill, and which is it's so hard right now, especially a lot of the kids who have never been in school for how many years, because of the pandemic. We have kids who had kinder, had first grade, distance learning. So we have to really address these skills with our students interacting with one another, dealing with their emotions. And I'm sorry, always getting away with myself. Go ahead, Ricardo. I apologize.
No, and as we were doing research, again, we're not experts, but we did know that according to the CDC, 1 in 5 children show signs of a mental health disorder each year. And when we were thinking about it, we thought, well, what a better place for schools, right? The ability that we have to see all these children in big numbers and to be able to provide support. And with that is
Right.
what really went really, really well with what we're trying to do today. Yeah.
Absolutely. So how does cell relate to mental health? And for us in my mind, I'm like, obviously, but it was kind of hard to put to words. So I'm glad Ricardo did some research and we found something that kind of helped us out here. So mental health is the overall term we use to represent how a student is able to regulate emotion. And mental health is the outcome of social emotional learning that has to happen. So they are not interchangeable, but they are related. Dr. Gasior,
And
did you want to say something about that?
No, I'm listening right now.
Okay, perfect.
and
Yeah.
I think as we were looking at it, we learned that while cell and mental health are not the same, cell can promote positive mental health in many ways. And I think
Definitely.
that's what we've been trying to do with some of our sessions that we've done so far.
Right.
Yeah,
All right.
I would definitely agree with that. So yeah.
So are we ready? We have some questions that we prepared for you, Dr. Gasior. If you don't mind, we're going to go ahead and go through them if you're ready.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I am. So do you want me to read the question? Do you want to read the question?
We will read the question to you. How about
Okay,
that?
fantastic. I am ready.
Okay. So these are questions that we came up with together that we thought, as teachers, what questions do we have about mental health that you can help us understand? So here's our first one. Since many are reluctant to seek professional help, what are signs to look out for?
Such a great question, right? And this is one of the things that we learn in mental health first aid. And again, I'm coming at mental health issues from that mental health first aid perspective because that's what my training is in. So I wanted to just, as I'm reading through this question, just to clarify, right? When we look for signs, we also look for symptoms, right? So think of signs as things that you can see, right? Like you would see a sign on the street. A symptom is something that somebody feels, right? So just two things. It's important to be able to recognize signs and symptoms. And again, if you take the training at some point, you'll learn, we talk about some of those differences and what they look like. So a sign might be somebody who's sweating, right? That's something that we can see. A symptom might be a headache or a stomach ache or somebody's racing heart, right? Just to give you two examples. So, so the signs and symptoms are going to vary depending on what the issue is, right? The signs and symptoms for a panic attack are different than the signs and symptoms of a psychotic episode, for example. But let's just assume here that we're talking about anxiety and depression because these are the two that tend to, across the board, manifest the most, right? And sometimes there's a comorbidity there, meaning that they manifest simultaneously. And I gave a presentation about 2 years ago when my colleague and we had to kind of pivot during the pandemic. We couldn't give the trainings anymore because they didn't have an online module. So we went into we were giving presentations and we had to do all this research. And I remember one of the articles that I read, because we often talk about anxiety and depression, like I said, as if they're synonyms and they're somewhat different, right? So it's really important to think about in case anybody's wondering. So think about depression has a mindset oriented toward the past, right?
Okay.
So think about the student who's depressed because they got a bad grade, or maybe there's trouble at home, or maybe they had a breakup, right? So these are all things that come from that mindset that's looking toward the past. Anxiety normally manifests in a mindset oriented toward the future, right? So this is why when we talk about anxiety, what are some of the signs that we see? Fear, worry, right? Racing heart, sweaty palms, all of these things, because anxiety normally, right? Think about when students get anxiety before a test. So anxiety is oriented toward the future, something that actually hasn't even happened yet. We're worried about things that could happen, right? And I put that out there because I think it's really important because we talk about those two so often, and yet we don't really understand the difference. And I think that thinking about them in those terms of, a mind that's oriented toward the past and a mind that's oriented toward the future.
And that's so clear. Yes.
Is really powerful and helpful, right? And when we talk to students about it, to make them understand why they might be feeling a certain way, right? And when those things, often they will show up simultaneously. There is that comorbidity rate. And the danger there, right, when we see two of them, presenting themselves, is that there's an increased risk of suicidal behavior. And I say that suicide is not an easy topic for anybody to talk about. But I think that as we're talking about mental health, we have to get comfortable having those conversations with students. And I'm going to share with you a little anecdote that happened from one of our trainings about a year ago. That's a heavy component of our training that we do on the second day. The second day is a little bit heavier. And after we were going through the suicide part, and we finished with the training a few hours later, and we received an email from a participant who was a teacher, a faculty member at another Cal State, and his daughter happened to be at home because they were still in remote learning. And she said to me, she happened to walk into the room when we were talking about suicide, and she sat next to him and said, "Dad, what are you talking about?" And he said, we're talking about suicide. And she said, "I know about suicide." And he kind of looked at her. He was stunned, right, that she would even come to him. And she sat there and listened for a little bit. And he told us, he was really honest and said, "Look, I took a moment to sit off to the side with my daughter to ask her if she'd ever had suicidal thoughts. And she admitted that she did." And he said, "You know what? Had I not been sitting in that training, having that conversation and practicing asking people, if they're thinking about killing themselves, that conversation might have never happened." So it really empowered him, and it empowered us, because we thought, wow, that's such a powerful moment for him to be able to have that conversation with his child. And to do it in a very honest and open way, right? I think a lot of times we're afraid we can't talk about suicide. We're going to plant a seed. And we always tell people, you know what? If a child or an adult or any individual is thinking about suicide, guess what? The thought is already there.
Right.
You're not going to plant it. And there's one of the videos that we see where the one of the actors says, "No, basically what you're doing is you're shining a light on something that's already there." Right. And enabling that person to have the conversation. Right. So it's, so I know that I've kind of gotten a little bit off topic with the,
that was great, actually.
But you can see how how kind of one thing leads to another. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, we've talked a little bit about some of the signs and symptoms. So I guess my whole purpose in telling you all of this, including the anecdote, is that the more we can have these open, honest conversations, the more mental health doesn't become a taboo topic that we talk about behind closed doors. I think that it just makes it easier for folks to seek out help, because right now stigma is still a big part of mental health, right? People don't, they think that they don't have a problem. They're afraid to get help for the problem. They're ashamed. And so it's all about us educating ourselves a little bit to be able to help these people, to have them, whether it be a student or our neighbor or our spouse or whoever it is, to get the help, because the help is there. And it's, mental health, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, my colleague and I would often say that, in the middle of this pandemic rages another epidemic, and it's the mental health epidemic.
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to be addressing, because during COVID, and I know that we're not out of the pandemic yet, but things really were exacerbated to a point that, even on our campus, we have a system, it's called a CARES team, and you can mobilize the CARES team if you think a student has an issue, and somebody will reach out and contact that student. But I don't know what we normally get in a given year, but I know that last year, so all of 2021, there were 900 CARES reports filed. And I know that that's,
my goodness,
they only get about a fraction of them. But because, students were there was just so much going on. It was the distance learning, it was, the privacy issues, the equity issues, all of these things just really came to a head during the pandemic. And so in any case, I think that even now, if, we can start talking about post-pandemic life, I think that mental health is going to continue to be, it's going to be at the forefront. It's not going anywhere, because it wasn't caused by the pandemic, right? It was just exacerbated by the pandemic. And so I think that, this is a time now where we just have to we have to create kind of the scaffolding approach, right? We talked about a bridge approach, but a scaffolding where we're working together, right? And our goal, like I always say, my goal isn't to analyze you or to diagnose you. My role is to help you get connected, to listen to you and help you get connected to the appropriate professionals.
Right.
So, yeah.
I wanted to interject, but I'm gonna keep. Oh no, I have to. I can't stop myself. So definitely, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of it kind of from this SEL lens that we've been going over, and I think the power of it has been giving the students the voice, the vocabulary they need to understand
Absolutely.
what they're feeling, to be able to express it. Because if we don't understand ourselves, how can we teach them? So they have these emotions that they're going through, but they don't know how to express them, and that's where SEL comes in. So I think that's a big piece. Okay, so our next question here: how can we provide aid to individuals in distress until they can be connected to professional help? How can we help them?
Sure. So one of the main tenets of, and again, I'm talking about this from a mental health first aid perspective, is to listen. That it's so important. And sometimes we think, well, listening is so easy, right? And if you look, but it's not, right?
Right.
I mean, sorry, I take that back. It is easy to do it if you know how to do it in the right way, because if you're having a conversation with your student, but you're checking your phone and you're checking your watch and you're fidgeting, right? You're not really listening. So we talk about being present and being in the moment and really engaging with the student when you need to. So in mental health first aid, we have an action plan that we practice using, and it's the acronym ALGEE, ALGEE. So the A stands for assist, approach, and assess. Assess, not assessing the person necessarily, but assessing the situation to make sure that the situation is safe, right? You don't want to approach somebody if they have a weapon, for example. And then the next big step is just to listen, right? If once you've determined that the person is not in a state of crisis, you want to listen to them. You want to give them information and resources that are available. This is another reason why it's so important for all of us in our communities to know what's available in our communities, right? Because on my campus, for example, I know what's available. I know what's available in the Long Beach area, so I can refer students. In your area might be different, and what you have on your campuses are going to be different. So we've all got to kind of do some homework, right, to find out what are these resources, right, to have those things at the ready rather than looking them up online, right? Because I think that being able to just cite those things to students is really powerful, because that shows that it's part of you, that it matters to you, that you're not just doing some Google search or making a phone call at the last minute. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Some people may not know every single resource, but it's important to know, especially I think, what's available on your campus, at your school, and perhaps maybe beyond your school, so that you can give students the right information and get them resources. And then the last two steps of ALGEE, right? There are two E's on there. So the first one is to encourage appropriate professional support, right? And that's where those resources come in, right? Like here on campus, I might say to a student, well, we have CAPS, and I can file a CARES report, or, here are some other hotlines. Here are some text hotlines where you can chat with somebody anonymously, right? And I have all of that information. I put it in my syllabi. I put it on my learning management system. I talk about it with my students. I have, things available in my office, pamphlets and things like that, so that they know that it's not just, it's not just talk that's coming from me. I really stand behind the work that I do. And then the last E in that acronym is to encourage self-help, right? We really talk about the importance. Self-help is not the same as self-care, right? Self-care would be, you want to encourage somebody to maybe go do yoga or read a book on mindfulness or whatever.
Okay.
Self-help so that's self-care, right? The things that we do to indulge ourselves a little bit at the end of the day or whenever we have some free time. But self-help is also, again, maybe it's reading a book, maybe it's listening to a podcast, something that's going to help you empower yourself, right? To understand what it is what you're dealing with, and just kind of, coping strategies. So, in mental health first aid, that's what we teach people to do, basically, is to have that conversation. That way, use destigmatizing language, to listen, And then again, get them connected, whether that be, you're going to do it text, or, you're going to walk the student to a counselor to make an appointment. I don't know how it works where you are, or any of the people, any of our listeners today are, because all those contexts vary, right, by district. But again, I think that's why it's important, before we even try to help, we've got to educate ourselves a little bit, and knowing where the resources are, knowing names of people, knowing where these entities are located physically, and how to connect people. That's just really, really important. So.
And I think that's a really great point, because in our school system, the K-12 system, it's different depending if you're elementary, middle, high, and it's really good to have that information ready. Not something that you have to Google and search for last minute. And so I think that's a very good point that you made. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, Ricardo. What are tools that we can use to intervene, de-escalate, and connect students with professional help? So I think that kind of segues into this.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a lot of, I feel like I answered two questions in one, but let's see if I can talk about. So the de-escalation part, it's all up, we do talk a little bit about this, right? Like how to because, not all situations are going to be anxiety and depression, or they could be anxiety and depression, but then all of a sudden there is a student who maybe is, visibly in an altered state, right? Maybe yelling, maybe angry, maybe, I mean, those
We've
things
seen
happen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all about, being able, we actually do an exercise that's really useful in mental health first aid, where we give folks a scenario and we say, hey, have you ever had a phone call with customer service because you've got an error on your bill? And what are some things that the customer service rep would say to you to escalate the situation, right? And we talk about things like, it's not my problem, and ma'am, you need to calm down, right? These are all things that are going to make things worse, right? And then we talk about, okay, what would de-escalating, right, for, somebody look like? And it's, you want to hear the customer service rep say, I'm really sorry this happened. How can we make it right? Hey, let me give you a credit on your next bill. You know what? I'm good, right? So it's the combination of the tone with which we say the things we say, and the language that we use, right? I think that with mental health issues, we never want to say things like, well, snap out of it, because you need to snap out of it. Or why are you so sad? Look how nice and sunny it is outside, right? Or you've got a great life. How can you, right? So it's
look on the bright side.
Right? It's all about, I think, validating individuals who are expressing, right, or maybe either they're expressing that they're experiencing a mental health challenge, or they're exhibiting signs and symptoms, right? The whole idea is we want to show support, and the best way that we can do that is through our words, right? Through our words, through our eye contact, through our body language. Because if we can have those types of caring conversations, and if we have the tools to have them, right? And again, I'm not here, I'm not here trying to recruit people for mental health at first aid. I'm just trying to say that I think it's a really useful tool.
Yes, definitely.
It will prepare you to have these conversations, because, I work with a lot of very intelligent people on my campus. I mean, and it always still surprises me that, even for them, sometimes they haven't thought about the language that they use, or the way that they send an email, and the things that they might say, right? Rather than leading with the empathy, which I know is a big part of SEL.
Yes.
Rather than leading with the empathy, we lead with the academic, and the empathy is either an afterthought or it's just completely absent. So we also do an exercise in there. It's a little scenario exercise where it's a fictional email written by a professor that actually does just that leads with the academic, that talks about, I gave you a break and you need to do this, and it's really important, and you have your whole life to work 40 hours a week, and right. And so it's kind of just taking that whole thing and just tweaking it. And when you tweak these situations, sometimes, the pivot is actually really easy. It's just being mindful of the language that we use, because language, especially for children, it's so important, right? To be caring and to be understanding and to not be judgmental. I mean, I'm sharing a little bit of personal information here, but I grew up, and I think this is probably where my interest in mental health comes from. A very kind of judgmental type of family, right? East Coast born and raised, working class. Not that my parents were bad people, but
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have those tools. And it was, we didn't have those conversations. And I think, gosh, how my life could have been different had we been a more open family, and if we were able to have those conversations, because it was all, you just didn't have them because that was considered shameful. So I think that being able to have these conversations too at school, I think will also help children have the conversations at home with their family, right? If we can
Yes.
involve them and teach them that it's okay to have these, it's okay to feel sad, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are support systems out there for you, that sadness is a human emotion, and that it doesn't mean you're going to be sad all the time, right? If you can talk to the
Mm-hmm.
right people and you can get the right perspective, things will get better. I mean, most mental health challenges are people are able to rebound and to recover from them statistically. So, that whole idea of giving people hope and giving students hope, right? That they're not going to
Mm-hmm.
probably feel that way all the time, that there are people out there who are going to help them. So, yeah, I think those are some of the tools that we have, in our toolbox. It's funny, one of my colleagues here referred to mental health first aid after he took the training. He said, "Well, now I have more tools for my toolbox," and I think
Exactly.
and
Mhm.
that's
Yes.
essentially what it does, right? So it's empowering. It can really, it can change somebody's life, and in certain cases, it can save somebody's life,
Yes.
which is, that's a huge thing, right? So yeah, I'm done with that question.
That was so great.
I was just soaking it in, but yeah,
Love it.
I love it so much. Okay, so so this statistic really kind of opened my eyes a bit. It said more than half of lifetime mental disorders begin by age 14, and
Yep.
3/4 by 24. What
Yep.
can we do to help?
Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I
You're
think
answering them all at once, but it all makes sense.
I
Keep
know,
going.
because like one thing leads me down another road. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry that if I'm being
No,
redundant,
please keep going.
but again, I think that this is this statistic. The second half of this statistic is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to become a mental health first aid instructor. Because when you think about it, 3/4 by age 24, that's college students. I mean, by
Yes.
definition, right?
Mhm.
So that's where I thought, wow, this is really where I can help. As a faculty member, by being that bridge, by being that conduit, by being an ally, by being out there and doing things like this, for example, that show that I am committed to this cause. So again, what can we do to help? Again, mental health first aid, and there are other trainings out there. So I'm not just saying you should do mental health first aid.
Mhm.
I've seen the other trainings. I'm familiar with them. I think this is a great training, especially they developed a new curriculum about a year and a half ago. A lot of them can be done virtually. This is how my colleague and I are able to reach faculty from all over the CSU, because we've got people coming in. We meet on a Zoom over 2 days,
Mhm.
3.5
Mhm.
hours a day. And then there's an asynchronous portion that comes with it that they do. They have 2 weeks to do that. So it's pretty straightforward. I think that one thing that we can do, again, is just get that training. It really is helpful. You get a nice little certificate.
Mhm.
And we've had so many faculty reach out to us after and say, "Oh my gosh, I left the training and I was able to put my skills to use immediately." Like literally, one woman said, "I was leaving the building, walking across the quad, and I saw my student sitting in the center of the quad crying, and I felt
Mm.
empowered." Right, and that's really what it does. I mean, so, I think that getting the training, I think that while some people like me, for example, I think that I'm a good listener. I kind of am a self-proclaimed empath. So I feel like I do feel people's feelings, and I can
Right.
absorb those things, but not everybody is that way. Right. And even for
Right.
me, I've always thought I'm a good listener, right? I do listen, and I know when to nod appropriately. I know when to ask a follow-up question, but some people don't know how to do that. So I think this training really gives you those tools again to have the conversation, and it's very empowering and it's very straightforward. It's not some super academic training. It's very, scenario based. The language is very easy to use. We have very informal discussions, kind of like what we're doing here. So I would say, getting that training is really important. And then just doing, I think I used the phrase before, and doing some homework. Because
Right.
even, it's important to know what resources are available, where you can direct students. And again, knowing that, like having numbers programmed into your phone, knowing names of people that you can recommend, because it's really, I think, a lot more powerful if you say to a student, hey, why don't you go check out this resource? Dr. So-and-so works there, and I know him personally, and he's really great, right? For example, because then that makes it just that much more real, I think, for the student. So I think those are two of the things, right? And again, it's all the other stuff that we learn in mental health first aid, which is, I think the big thing is to listen to students, to not, and again, we want to approach, if you approach a student and you see signs and symptoms and they're not responding, we don't want to pressure them necessarily,
Right.
but
Yeah.
just kind of checking in with them. It's really, mental health first aid in a lot of ways is using common sense,
Which is not very common.
right? If somebody says, I'm not ready, maybe you can say, okay, if you don't want to talk to me, how about, especially if a student, maybe one of my Latino students doesn't feel comfortable talking to me for whatever reason.
Right.
They want to talk to somebody who's also Latino, then I can direct them to somebody, right, who they might identify more with, right? So it just all depends, but I think listening is important. I think educating ourselves and those two things in combination, I think, just really make us powerful advocates. And I think it's important for students to know that it's, that we're not just doing these things because we're being told that it's important, but
Right.
because it really becomes part of who we are as people, right? It's part of our ethos. And so, yeah.
All the things you said, I think to myself, of course we use it towards our students, but to one another, to our own children, just being able to listen and to educate ourselves. So thank you. And I think that carries us to this question, which you kind of also addressed: how can
I
we
did.
destigmatize mental health disorders? And I think you as you're speaking,
I
it's already
know.
empowering me,
I'm
to,
glad.
yeah. So I'm
Yeah,
sure our
and I
viewers
and
are
I
sharing that
apologize
too.
for that. It's really hard to talk. I mean, at least for me to talk
Please
about
don't
mental
apologize.
health.
It's
No,
No.
amazing.
but the reason I'm apologizing is because it's so hard, because a lot of times you get questions and it's really easy, I think, to compartmentalize them.
Yes.
But I think with mental health, it's almost impossible because there's such a continuum there, right? One thing
Yes.
leads into another. And so I'm just trying to have this be as organic as I possibly can. So again, apologies to everybody if I repeat myself, but I think that repetition, is good. It increases muscle memory and other things like that, right? So I think that destigmatization, at the core of destigmatizing, is language, right? It is, and we've talked about this a little bit. What type of language are you using, right? Are you saying, I care about you, tell me more? Or are you saying, oh, you need to just get over it and get on with life, right? Two totally different approaches to it. And one is actually inviting somebody to have a conversation to continue, and the other one is shutting the person down. So
Right.
imagine, even if you think, gosh, this student, this is an act, this isn't, you never, take all of these things seriously, because you don't know. You don't want to ever have that regret where you didn't take a student seriously, and then that student ends up hurting themselves or something happens. It's just best practice to, to listen to them. This destigmatizing language comes in again in the word choice that we use. It comes in the tone that we use. It comes in when we're able to talk about mental health, not as a sidebar. And I think that students get a sense for that, right? If it's just kind of lip service, or if we really feel that. And I think that, why I love having these conversations right now is because I feel like it really is part of the fabric of who I am, right? And that's why I'm able to
Right.
speak about it in a way that's very flowy, right? And I'm actually, as I'm having this conversation with you, I'm like, wow, I'm proud of myself right now.
Yeah, we're
I
proud of
don't
you
know
too.
that
We're so
right, because it takes time to learn how
Yeah.
to really, I think, make all these connections, but they're
Mhm.
really important if you want to have, you know, a real genuine conversation with students and to have them trust you, because a huge part of this is trust too, right? If the student
Yeah,
doesn't
of
trust you,
course.
they're not going to confide in you.
Of
There's no
course.
way. So yeah, I would say language is definitely the big piece of destigmatizing and just, you know, talking about mental health, again, not as if it were this separate side conversation, but somehow
Mhm.
integrating it into the things that we do,
Yes.
whether that be, you know, an exercise, a writing exercise in mental health, whether that be, you know, my students last semester, it was about week 6, and I could tell they were all feeling they were grad students, right? Feeling a little bit tired. And I
Yes.
said, you know what, folks, let's just take a moment. First half hour, we can spare a half an hour. I want to know how you're feeling today. Let's just talk. Like what's on your mind? What's happening?
Wow.
And we had a half an hour, and not every student spoke, but I think they appreciated, because a few of them wrote to me afterwards to say, professor's never done that with us before.
I would
Thanks
appreciate
for
that.
thanks for listening. I mean, and for some
Yes.
students, it's just so cathartic, right? It's not like
Yeah.
I'm necessarily connecting them with anybody. We're all listening. And by
Mhm.
having that conversation as a group, it kind of becomes a group therapy, because if one student is
Wow.
saying, you know, I feel really overwhelmed and I'm feeling really depressed because, you know, my grandmother passed away, that might empower another student to
Yeah.
be,
Mhm.
oh, wow, look, she was able to talk about that and I'm feeling that way. So it's okay for me to do it
Exactly.
too. And look, nobody's judging her. People are supportive. And so I think it's the again, I've said this 3 times now, but I think that destigmatizing comes through language, and for us just being really mindful of what we say, how we say it, and the tone that we use to say it.
And that's why I feel like your work is so important, because I think a lot of people don't know that they
Mm,
sound the way they do, or that
right?
they're, you know, you gave examples of how some teachers or adults can
Yeah.
react to what students have to say, and sometimes they don't know they're actually doing that, or the effect they're having on the kids.
Yeah,
So,
and that it can do
mhm.
harm, right? I mean, how, you know,
Yes.
and when we give those some of the examples, like, right, I just need to snap out of it. I mean, people laugh,
Mhm.
but it's a
Yeah, they're
nervous
like,
laugh,
"Oh."
because I think we've
Yeah.
all said it. We've all thought it or said it, right?
Right. Yeah.
At some point, I luckily have not probably thought that for a really long time, but maybe when I was younger, I would think that, right, before I had any of this training, or I was
Mhm.
even, you
Yeah.
know, tuned in to what mental health first aid was. So,
Right.
yeah.
So,
The
what
next
role do
question.
schools yes, what role do schools play in promoting mental health for all students?
Yeah, this is such a great question, right? Because I think so far we've kind of been talking about it on an individual kind of teacher
Mhm.
level, but I think that, you know, if we really want to see the change, if we really want to destigmatize, if we really want to promote mental health, it needs to come from that systemic level, right? And the
Yes.
Mhm.
school is the system, right? And where I know we've been talking a lot about systems and systemic things happening, right?
Right.
And I think that one of the main things I think that's really important is that schools, you know, they need to walk the talk, right? I've seen this at universities, at schools, where it's, oh, we prioritize
Mhm.
mental health is so important, but where are the resources? Because let's call a spade, right? I mean,
Right.
if you are going to promote mental health, you need resources to be able to do that. You need professionals who can help to do that. You need to be able to create initiatives. You need to have trainings and all that stuff, right? I mean, we live in a world that's in capitalistic USA. I mean, money kind of
It's the
rules the
truth.
world, and people's time is valuable, and,
Yeah.
you know, expertise is valuable. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things, right, that we need to make sure that schools have the resources to support this kind of work, to bring in the appropriate people and professionals and to run those initiatives that we should be having at schools. Um, I think that it's important also that school leadership, and here when I'm saying leadership, I'm not, because often in a university context, we're talking about just administrators. But I really see, I was thinking about it. I really see leadership at a school as everybody who's an adult at that school.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
see it as
Mhm.
from your principal and your
Mhm.
superintendent all the way down to the cafeteria worker. I do.
Wow.
Because the students are interfacing with these people. And I think that, if it's just coming from the teachers and it's not coming from above, I think that, it's a team effort. Again, we talked about that scaffolding, and I think that everybody
Mm.
needs to be on board. And again, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be a counselor, but getting the training and making sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language.
Mhm.
So important. So I think that that's one of the things I think that schools can and should be doing. And unfortunately, I think that it does happen that a school is just lip service, right? But that doesn't do students any good. If you're just saying, yeah, we really care about students' mental health, but then there's no resources to actually show that you care about them, well,
Right.
you're not helping anybody. So I think it's the resources and just this kind of team effort that starts, right? And again, I don't mean to just at the bottom, I mean just for lack of a better term, right? Starting with just staff who support at the school all the way
Mhm.
up to the principal and
Yeah.
superintendent,
Mhm.
and to when especially those people, whether they be in the cafeteria or whether they be walking through the halls or whatever, just even asking students, hey, how are you doing? Right? I mean, I don't know how often that
Yes.
happens, because
Right.
I think that a lot of times the administrators are kind of hiding in their, right, in their, I don't know, they're in meetings or they're in offices, but actually, you know, putting their face out there, and maybe
Mhm.
having, even like a little discussion group, maybe with, so the administrators can also learn, because I think that they see this as kind of a, right, this is more of a teacher's issue, right? Teachers should only be trained.
Mm.
Administrators don't need to know. Well, we don't interface with students, but they should be, right? And they should at least know, even if they're not interfacing with students on a daily basis, they should be able to have those conversations too. Because guess what? If they're not going to have them with the students at the school where they work, they're going to have them with somebody that they know, whether it be a friend or a spouse or a child. Because as I always say, people ask me, well, who should get trained in mental health first aid? And I always say, if you're a human being and you know other human beings, then you should get mental health first aid, because
I agree.
it doesn't, right? This isn't a class or a race or a gender issue. This is a human issue.
Yes.
We can all benefit from having that training, whether it be QPR or mental health first
Mhm.
aid or some other sort of mental health training. Again, to help us have the language and to teach us how to listen appropriately and to connect people in the appropriate way.
Right, and I think, everything I think this actually combines so well with the last question is how can we be intentional in our focus on the promotion of mental health? And, so
And
that's the last question. Mhm.
again, I feel like my name should be Dr. Repetition, because I think repeating
Mm.
myself this entire evening, right? But I think it's, yeah, again, I feel like I'm anticipating every question that comes up without meaning to do that. Again, apologies. So
That's
I think
wonderful.
it's, maybe this is a chance for me to kind of go back and talk about some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, right? Making sure that, from a teacher's perspective, for example, that we are including this information, in learning management systems, that we have,
Yes.
phone numbers and emails and contacts of people that students can reach out to, having those conversations in our classrooms in a very kind of organic way, as much as we can, right? Maybe thinking about how can we incorporate a writing exercise that involves mental health, right? Um, Giving students time to talk, taking a little mental health kind of break in your class. Maybe, there are some days where we know that, and I know this happens because I've done it, right? Where the teacher, right, they've got a busy week or something's going on, you want to put on a movie, right? So maybe you put on a movie that deals with maybe some mental health issues, or maybe instead of showing that movie, you just have a conversation where you sit in a semicircle with your students and you have a conversation
Mhm. Mhm.
about mental health, and just
Yes.
that, and it can be very organic, where you start to, what do you guys, what is mental health? why do you think mental health is so common, right? And so if you can kind of start asking these types of questions, I think it really just gives students the confidence to want to have those conversations, because trust me, they want to have those conversations.
Yes.
Students are very, very interested in mental health. They're very interested in the way the brain works and psychology. And I think even here on our campus, I mean, our psychology department is one of the largest departments, right?
I graduated from your school in your psych department. I just have to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think no, and that's not to say that every person who goes into psychology wants to become a counselor necessarily, but you know, there is this interest in how the brain works, and I think mental health
Absolutely.
is, you know, basically understanding a little bit about how the brain works. So I don't think it's an accident that we have, you know, over 1,000 students majoring in psychology. There's a deep interest, and students want to talk about it, right? It's just helping them get over that stigma hump in a way, right? To be able to have those conversations. And if they can see that we can have those conversations, right? And even, you know, sometimes talk about our own mental health challenges. You know, I've talked with students very openly about my own anxiety that I still struggle with today. I've got it more under control, but I'm, you know, I'm always worried about, and this is something that runs in my family. And so to be able to recognize that it's okay, right? And I know how to get it under control, and I know now how to not let it get out of control, but sometimes it does. I mean, you're in a situation where, right? Like when Ricardo had asked me today to have a dual screen, and I had a moment of anxiety. Instead of saying,
it does cause a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, let me try and get all that set up, where I'm freaking out trying to get it set up. I just said, no, you know, yeah, I don't think I can do it. And he was really kind, and he said, no problem. And I was like, right? Because the last thing I needed was for him to say, you need to figure it out. You've got an hour and a half, do it. So, yeah. So I think again, I'm drifting from the question, but I think that, you know, I hope that this was a useful session, and that it gave you food for thought, and that it maybe validated some things that you thought, and maybe it did some myth busting in other parts. And, you know, I'm really happy, to be able to talk with the two of you and with everybody out there today. So thanks for having me. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to ask.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, you know, there will always be forever more questions, but all of the things you just said right now, yes, the wheels in my mind are turning so much, you know, from the perspective of a teacher, of a parent, of a co-human being, you know, and so I'm just, my mind is kind of like this right now. I feel like there's so much I want to say, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to let Ricardo.
I did my job then.
You did very well. Very well.
No, we've been talking about empowering our students with that language, and to be able to express themselves and those feelings in that language from social and emotional learning, and to be able to now be able to do that, to come to an adult that is able to be there for them. I just think this was amazing, Bonnie. I'm so like, yeah.
And I think a lot of our teachers, especially those who have been doing SEL with fidelity and have been doing it school wide, will feel very validated by a lot of the things that we talked about today. Because I think, as you were saying, you know, every adult in the school should be doing this for these students. And I feel like some students really have put that system in place where they do have that support from adults all around. And they even have like calm rooms and opportunities for the kids to, you know, that's actually part of very intentional. So I think that a lot of them will feel very validated and have even more questions now, because, you know, wow, I'm so amazed. I need more words.
We're so grateful.
Well, invite me back another time, and we'll do it again. We'll have part 2.
You heard that? Everyone heard that?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.